So far, we have learned about jobs in ancient Greece. Some jobs were farming, shepherding, and seafaring, which means that they worked on the water. And we've learned about religion in ancient Greece. The Greeks believed that Olympian gods and goddesses created or controlled certain things that happened in nature. The king of all gods and the god of lightning was Zeus. Turn to whoever is helping you today and tell them about one of the other gods or goddesses that we read about. Today, we are going to learn about an important contribution from ancient Greece. Remember, a contribution is a thing or idea that is shared and passed on over time because it is considered to be helpful and good. We talked about silk and paper that were contributions from ancient Chinese civilization. And in first grade, we learned about the contribution of the pyramids from the Egyptians. Today we are going to learn about a unique contribution that the ancient Greek civilization made that is still a part of our lives today. Sacred. We talked about the word sacred in our last domain about religion in ancient India and China. Sacred means that it is holy or worthy of respect. For example, churches, temples, and mosques are considered sacred places by people of various religious beliefs. Determination. Determination is a firm decision to accomplish something. For example, it takes great determination to finish reading your first chapter book independently. So that means you would be reading it by yourself. Compete. To compete means to try hard to outdo others in a task, race, or other contest. Every year, Sally and Juan compete in their school's spelling bee to see who can win the most rounds. Victory. A victory is a triumph or a win. For example, a soccer team could claim victory over a competing team to win a game. Grand. If something is grand, it is very impressive in size, appearance, or general character. My sister's important piano recital was held in a grand ballroom with high ceilings and a large, tall stage. Have you ever experienced something grand? An antonym for the word grand, or a word that means the opposite, is ordinary. Ordinary means unimpressive or everyday. I'm going to read several sentences. If I describe something that is grand, say, "That is grand." If I describe something that is ordinary, say, "That is ordinary." Our first one is a very large swimming pool with a waterfall and a slide. What about your bedroom? How about the school cafeteria? And our last one is a fancy building with huge rooms, tall ceilings, and special decorations. The contribution that we will be talking about today is the Olympic Games. Have you ever seen the Olympics? What do you know about the Olympic Games? Listen to our story today and you'll find out more about the first Olympic Games and how they were first created. The travelers came from all directions, from every part of Greece and from every Greek city-state. Some even came from such distant places as Egypt and Spain. Many traveled on ships. Some rode on horseback or in horse-drawn chariots. Many hardy souls walked the whole way, determined to reach their distant goal, for they believed they were on a holy journey. Rich and poor, carried in luxury and treading on foot, they came by the thousands to take part in and watch the Olympic Games. Remember, the word luxury means comforts and pleasures. The wealthy people being carried in luxury were riding comfortably in carriages, whereas others were walking on the rugged ground. The Olympic Games were held every 4 years at the site of Olympia, and included contests in which ancient Greek athletes would compete. Because these games were part of a religious festival to honor the king of the gods, Zeus, they were considered sacred. In the first Olympic Games, there were only foot races or running races. Later came events like wrestling, boxing, racing horses and chariots, throwing the heavy stone discus, and throwing the javelin, a long type of spear. Among the travelers to the games one year were 2 men named Myron and Pindar. Myron and Pindar were real artists who lived in ancient Greece. They made their way to the sacred site of Olympia in a private carriage drawn by a team of horses and driven by a servant. If they were riding in a private carriage, do you think Myron and Pindar were wealthy, or do you think they were just like everybody else? The passenger in the brown cloak, Myron, was so muscular that the other travelers wondered, is he one of the Olympic athletes? But Myron was not an athlete. He was a sculptor who used his muscular arms and huge hands to carve statues out of bronze and marble. Myron was telling his traveling companion, "Of course you are right, Pindar. I could just invite the champions to my home after the competition and carve statues of them there. But I want my statues to show the exact moment when a runner starts to pull ahead in a race, or the instant when a discus thrower is about to let go of that heavy stone and fling it down the field. So I prefer to see those Olympic events with my own eyes." His friend Pindar smiled and answered, "I, on the other hand, have written poems in honor of champions without ever having seen them compete. But I am less interested in watching a runner cross the finish line in first place than I am in the effort and determination it took for him to get there. It is this that I admire, and it is about this that I write." Pindar's poems were called odes and were written to be sung together with instruments and dancing at special occasions like banquets and festivals. Myron grinned. "Well, your way works for you, just as mine works for me." Suddenly, a voice called out, "Pindar, what are you doing with that Athenian? Don't you know that we Thebans are still fighting a war against Athens?" Athens and Thebes were 2 city-states in Greece that did not get along. Pindar was from Thebes, and Myron was from Athens. We will learn more about these city-states later. Turning, Pindar recognized a friend from his hometown of Thebes. Directing his carriage driver to stop the horses, Pindar said, "My friend, you know that all such conflicts are set aside here. Everyone is guaranteed safe passage going to and returning from the Olympic Games, so that all may gather to take part in this grand competition to honor Zeus and the other gods." The Olympic Games were more important than the conflicts the city-states were having with each other, and these conflicts were put on hold so that everyone could gather safely for these sacred games. Pindar went on, "Besides, Myron and I are artists. When I write a poem or when Myron carves a statue, our interest goes far beyond the boundaries of any one city. We honor these champions as examples, so we might encourage all Greeks to do the best they can in their own lives. This is how we honor the gods who gave us our hearts, minds, and muscles." The Greeks believed that the gods created humans and gave them the talents that they possessed. By the time Pindar and Myron reached Olympia, the greatest athletes in the Greek world had already gathered. Pindar and Myron looked around excitedly at the running track, the long jump pit, and the vast horse racing stadium. In the distance, thick clouds hid the peaks of Mount Olympus. All of the athletes were men, for there were no events for women in the original Olympic Games, with the exception of the horse and chariot races. If women owned horses, they were allowed to enter them in the races, but they were not the ones who rode the horses or drove the chariots. Women were not even allowed to be present at the Olympic Games to see their horses win. Victory was a great source of pride for the winners and their home cities. An Olympic champion received a wreath of laurel leaves to wear atop his head. But more than that, he knew his name would live forever as a hero in his city's history. In fact, many city-states awarded large sums of money to their champions. In some regards, things have not changed much in the 27 centuries since the first Olympics. Modern athletes, too, may win fame, even if their greatest reason to compete is for the love of the sport. The Summer Olympics are still held every 4 years, but now there are also Winter Olympics, with winter sports, such as skiing, bobsledding, and figure skating, that are held 2 years after every Summer Olympics. So today, there are Olympic Games every 2 years. The location of the Olympic Games also changes each time. They have been hosted in cities such as Seoul, Korea, Atlanta, Georgia, and Athens, Greece. Men, and now women, from all over the world travel to the chosen city to compete. Even if their countries are not getting along, people usually set aside their conflicts, just as in the ancient days, in honor of the Games. Even though many centuries have passed since Myron and Pindar traveled to the Olympics, they too are still remembered. Today, Myron's depiction of an Olympic champion, the discus thrower, remains one of the most famous statues in the world. The original statue was lost long ago, perhaps in a war or an earthquake. But fortunately, someone had made an exact copy, so we can still admire Myron's work. As for the poet Pindar, the Greeks loved his poem so much that for centuries after his death, he was remembered by the priests and priestesses at Apollo's temple. Priests and priestesses were men and women in charge of the temples and ceremonies. Each god and goddess had a temple in Greece with a statue. The Greeks would go to the temples and offer gifts to their gods. Remember, Apollo was the Greek god of poetry. So because Pindar was a poet, that's why he was remembered there. They would pray at closing each night, "Let Pindar the poet attend the supper of the gods." Later still, when the Greek king, Alexander the Great, ordered that Pindar's home city of Thebes be destroyed in a war, Alexander commanded his soldiers, "But keep Pindar's house safe from the flames." Pindar's ideas about doing our best with whatever talents we are given, and about getting along peacefully with one another, remain part of our thinking today. In fact, we still call this way of seeing things the Olympic spirit. Today, we have just learned about a very important contribution from ancient Greece, the Olympics. And as always, I've got some questions for you about what we learned about. My first question is, who were the Olympic Games held in honor of originally? Right, they were held in honor of the king of all Greek gods, Zeus. Why were the Olympic Games called the Olympic Games? How did they get that name? They got that name because of where the first Olympic Games were held, Olympia, the city-state Olympia. We learned about two people in our lesson today, one named Myron and one named Pindar. Who were Myron and Pindar? You've got it. They were two wealthy men that were traveling to the Olympic Games. Myron was a famous sculptor, and Pindar was a famous poet. We talked about a very famous sculpture called the discus thrower. Who created that sculpture? You've got it. It was Myron. What does it show? It's called the discus thrower. What does it show? It shows a picture of an Olympic athlete throwing a discus. What kind of events were included in the original Olympic Games? In the first Olympic Games, what kind of events were featured? In the first Olympic Games, it was mostly foot races. What about today? We still have the Olympics today. What kind of events do we have in modern day Olympics? There are a lot of events in modern day Olympics. We have skiing and ice skating and basketball, and we still have foot races too. Turn to whoever is helping you today and tell them, how are the Grand Olympic Games today the same as the first Olympic Games held in ancient Greece? And how are they different? How are they the same and how are they different from now and in ancient Greece? All right, my friends, we're going to add a couple of pictures to our civilization chart. The first one is a picture of the first Olympic Games, a painting of the first Olympic Games. The first Olympic Games were held in honor of the king of gods, Zeus. It was part of a religious festival. Because it was a religious affair back in ancient Greece, I'm going to put this picture under religion. This one will go under religion. But today, Olympics today are not held in honor of Zeus. Today, the Olympics are a fun way for people from all over the world to compete against each other in different events. This is an important contribution from ancient Greece because we still do the Olympics today, even though it looks a little bit different than it did back in ancient Greece. I'm going to put this under our contribution column. The Olympics were an important contribution from ancient Greece. Another contribution from ancient Greece is the work of the sculptor Myron. Oops, sorry, wrong side. The sculptor Myron and the poet Pindar. We still have their sculptures and their poetry to look at and read today. I'm going to put this photo in our contributions column as well. There we go. Go ahead and get the PDF that's attached to this assignment open in Kami, and it should look like this when you've got it. Today we are going to be taking notes about some of the contributions from ancient Greece that we learned about today. Unlike with our religion and jobs, this time I'm not going to type exactly what your notes should say. I want you to tell me something about 3 different contributions that we learned about today. The 3 things that I want you to tell me about today are the Olympic Games, Myron's statue, and Pindar's poems. So I want you to tell me at least one thing about each of these things that you remember from our read aloud. For the Olympic Games, what do they look like today, and how are they different from what the very first Olympic Games were like? What do you remember about Myron's famous statue that he created? And what do you remember about Pindar's poems? Tell me something about each of those three things, and if you would like, you can add an illustration. You can add a drawing for those three things as well. When you are done, go ahead and turn it in, and we've got one more thing to talk about before we're done today. All right, friends, before we go, I want to talk about the proverb, where there's a will, there's a way. This proverb is another way of saying that no matter how difficult a task may seem at first, if you have the determination to do it and the desire to work hard, you can always find a way to succeed or to make something happen. The athletes who compete in the Olympic Games have to work very hard for a long time and be very determined. While these athletes are training for Olympic events, they may think to themselves, where there is a will, there's a way. Think of a time when you could have used this saying in your life. So if Shauna had never played basketball, but signed up to be on the basketball team, and then practiced every single day in preparation for the basketball season, and eventually made 3 baskets in her very first game, is that an example of the saying where there's a will, there's a way? Yes, she's working hard to make her goal of being on the basketball team and being successful on the team come true. If Jaylin wanted to sign up for the talent show at school, but didn't sign up because he wasn't sure he could play piano well enough to play a whole song, is that a good example of if there's a will, there's a way? No, he was not very determined and gave up soon.